My name is Heidi Holtz. This is my class presentation for Psychology 350. I chose Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder, or PMDD. This is a disorder that affects about 3 to 8% of women. It is commonly mistaken for PMS. PMS is the normal hormonal change that a woman goes through about a week before her menstrual cycle, but PMDD is characterized by more intense and notable emotional symptoms, and they are paired with very similar physical symptoms, but everything is very exaggerated and more extreme than what a common PMS cycle will be for a woman. It is also new to the DSM-5 manual. So there are two lists of criteria. I'll go through them quickly and explain how they relate to diagnosing. So there's an emotional category: extreme mood swings, sudden sadness, rejection sensitivity, irritability, anger, increased interpersonal conflicts, anxiety, depressed mood, tension, keyed up or on edge, hopelessness. And then in the cognition or the physical category, decreased interest, poor concentration, low energy, appetite changes, hypersomnia, which is oversleeping, insomnia, overwhelmed, joint and muscle pain, breast tenderness, and bloating. So how that works is there has to be a total of at least 5 symptoms, and there has to be at least one from each category. So that can be any number of combinations, but there has to be one from each category. They have to be present for most of a woman's cycle. So if you look at this adorable little calendar that I found on Google for tracking your hormonal cycle, the symptoms will typically peak 10 to 14 days, so anywhere right around here, right after ovulation. The symptoms will start to manifest, and then they will sharply drop off during the middle of a woman's period week, and the body will level back out as it goes back into ovulation. So they do have to, this is the window that they have to be present in, and they have to be documented for at least 2 months. So doctors will typically have women journal the symptoms for 2 months consistently, and there's different forms of how they do that to then see if they qualify for this diagnosis. A case example that I found is a young woman named Augusta. She was diagnosed with PMDD in her late teen years. Before she was diagnosed, she thought she might have depression or bipolar 2. She wasn't really sure what was going on. I'm going to show you a clip of her really quick explaining what it feels like.
If you don't know what PMDD is, picture PMS times a million. Extreme emotional and physical highs and lows. I would laugh so hard that I would actually start crying, and then I would just get really sad about, I don't know, I just felt sadness and hopelessness really deep within me for no apparent reason. It was just a feeling that overcame me. The physical part of it is that because your hormones are changing at whatever time it gets triggered. For me, my boobs were really sore for 3 weeks before my period, which if you do math is 75% of the month. I would get really bad migraines. I started tracking it, and I would get migraines 12 days before my period every single cycle. So PMDD for me is really extreme highs and lows, or exaggerated emotions and physical feelings and things before your period.
So it just kind of shows from someone who struggles with PMDD what that feels like. She saw a commercial. She goes on to explain she saw a commercial for the birth control pill Yaz. When it first came out, it was advertised as an option for PMDD treatment. She listened to the symptoms, realized that might be what she had, and she and her mother went to the doctor and received that diagnosis. She was on Yaz, a hormonal birth control pill, for 4 years before she had to go off of it because it gave her adverse side effects in other areas of her health, which is a common thing for women on any type of hormonal birth control. That's a common complaint. So now she just uses a natural approach with diet and exercise. She also tracks her cycle very minutely, and she self-monitors, so she knows when her cycle is going to affect her emotionally and how it can impact her professional and her personal relationships. So the possible etiology for this, the most recent research has shown that it's a link between 2 hormones and some neurotransmitters in a woman's body. So we go back to that adorable little calendar. Right before the symptoms occur, a woman's body will dip in its progesterone levels. So progesterone is typically produced during ovulation. It will start to drop off, and this is when the symptoms begin to manifest. Progesterone produces a substance called allopregnanolone, and this bonds to the GABA receptors in the brain and helps regulate mood. When this progesterone level dips, some women are very sensitive to that, and the allopregnanolone is not being produced as much or at all, and the GABA receptors aren't bonding with it, so that's when you see the extreme emotional and physical symptoms during this 10 to 14 day window. A woman's body will begin to produce that progesterone again about halfway through the menstrual cycle, and that's when we see the symptoms level back out and she moves back into ovulation. So 2 common treatments for this are, one of them is antidepressants, so they use SSRIs with intermittent dosing. So this helps the body produce the serotonin, and when that happens, the side effect is that it helps the body produce progesterone, so then that normal dip that we see happen in the woman's cycle doesn't occur, the progesterone maintains, which leads to the allopregnanolone maintaining, bonding with the GABA receptors, and so that whole cycle is just not broken like it would be without the serotonin, the SSRIs. Intermittent dosing means that it's only used during that 10 to 14 day window where the woman's body, that cycle of progesterone is broken or is lower, and so it just causes her to have those symptoms. So immediately following the end of her period is when she will stop taking that medication, and because her body then is able to maintain that on its own. So that's what the intermittent dosing means. The other option, like was in the case example, was birth control or hormone therapy. Specifically, they use ovulation suppressants. So that whole ovulation cycle, the part with the cute little baby faces on it, that when these women take this medication, that part of her cycle never occurs. Which keeps the cycle of progesterone and all that consistent, and it just doesn't break, and that seems to be what helps. They're not 100% sure why those contraceptives work. There's a lot of research that they are still doing on that, and they're not sure why this works for some women but doesn't work for others. So the birth control option is commonly used by women who can't tolerate the SSRIs, but then sometimes women can't tolerate the hormonal birth control either. It's just kind of a case-by-case basis. So common treatments for this birth control are in the form of a daily pill, IUD, or tri-monthly injections. 2 interesting things I found about this diagnosis. One is that there is some links to being comorbid, with bipolar 2. Large studies did find that women are 8 times more likely to be comorbid with bipolar 2 when they've been diagnosed with PMDD. One reason they think this could happen is that there is already a comorbidity with MDD, major depressive disorder, so they think that could be linked to that, but this needs more research, especially because there are some smaller studies that did not find the same correlations. The other really interesting fact I found out about this diagnosis was there was a huge debate between the feminist community and the psychology community to put PMDD as a disorder at all in the DSM-5. The feminists tended to argue, based on what I read, that it was demeaning to women to have their emotions and their hormones put into a psychiatric disorder instead of being accepted as part of female biology. And they also argued that menstrual symptoms can be construed as cultural. And so some women can be taught to view these negatively instead of just accepting them as part of their female biology. It's problematic to think that way because the science just backs up what the disorder describes. So I get the one argument where they just don't want female emotions to be marginalized, but on the other hand, having a diagnosis and a label for it can then help women to seek treatment. And as the case example showed, this can very severely affect a woman's life and cause distress. So I support, for what it's worth, the inclusion of it in the DSM-5, but there was a major argument about whether or not to include it. Okay, and that's all that I have. Thank you for watching.